The dust settled over Fort Worth, Texas, like a death shroud as Hannah Foster pushed her weathered wooden cart down the rutted Main Street. The year was 1873, and the West was still wild enough to make a woman traveling alone keep one hand near the small derringer hidden in her skirt pocket. She'd arrived on yesterday's train with nothing but determination, and the name of a man who supposedly needed household help, a reclusive rancher named Thomas Westfield who'd placed an advertisement in papers across 3 states. "You'll regret going out there, miss," the station master had warned her yesterday. "Westfield's place is 5 miles out. Man's barely spoken 10 words to anyone since he came back from the war. Some say he's touched in the head." Hannah had simply smiled. "I've dealt with difficult men before, sir." Now, as she approached the edge of town, she spotted a tall figure leaning against a hitching post outside the general store. His long coat was dusty, his hat pulled low. Even from a distance, Hannah could tell he was watching her. "Miss Foster?" His voice was deep, rough from disuse. Hannah stopped her cart. "Mr. Westfield," he nodded once, eyes flicking to her belongings, a single trunk and a case of cleaning supplies. "Thought you'd be older." "I'm 23, sir. Plenty old enough to clean a house proper." Something passed across his face, annoyance, perhaps, or doubt. "My wagon's around back. You can leave that cart with Jensen." He gestured toward the store. The journey to Westfield's ranch was silent save for the creak of wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the horses. Hannah used the time to study her new employer. Thomas Westfield was perhaps 30, with a lean, hard face bronzed by the sun. A thin scar ran from his left temple down to his jawline. His shoulders were broad beneath his worn coat, his hands steady on the reins. She'd expected someone older, possibly fat and lazy, the type of man who'd need a housekeeper because he couldn't be bothered to care for himself. This man looked like he didn't need anyone at all. The ranch came into view as they crested a rise, a modest 2-story house with a wide porch, a barn, and several outbuildings. A few cattle dotted the distant pasture, and a small garden plot showed signs of recent care. "It's not much," Westfield said, breaking his long silence, "but it's mine." "It looks lovely," Hannah replied honestly. After 2 years in Philadelphia's crowded tenements, any open space felt like paradise. Westfield pulled the wagon to a stop. "Your room's upstairs, end of the hall. Kitchen needs the most work." "I've been managing," but he stopped, as if embarrassed by the admission that he might need help. "I'll start there then," Hannah said, climbing down from the wagon without waiting for assistance. Inside, the house told its own story. It was clean enough but Spartan, a man's house with few comforts. The kitchen was functional but austere. No curtains on the windows, no tablecloth, dishes stacked neatly but without order. Hannah set her trunk in the upstairs room, small but with a window facing east, before returning to the kitchen to begin her work. By sundown, she had reorganized the pantry, scrubbed the stove, and prepared a simple but hearty meal. Westfield came in from the barn smelling of horse and leather, pausing in the doorway as if surprised to find food waiting. "You didn't have to cook," he said, removing his hat. "Cooking's part of keeping house, Mr. Westfield," Hannah replied, setting a plate before him. "Unless you'd prefer I didn't." He stared at the steaming plate, beef stew with the last of the summer vegetables and fresh biscuits. "No, this is, thank you." They ate in silence, but Hannah noticed how he savored each bite, how his shoulders gradually relaxed. When he finished, he pushed back from the table. "I rise at dawn," he said. "Don't need breakfast prepared. I can manage coffee and biscuits." "As you wish. I'll focus on the rest of the house tomorrow." He nodded, then hesitated as if wanting to say more. Instead, he simply said, "Good night, Miss Foster," and disappeared into what she assumed was his study. The next morning, Hannah woke before sunrise. By the time she heard Westfield moving about downstairs, she had dressed and begun assessing the living room. She listened as he moved through the kitchen, the back door opening and closing as he headed out to begin his day's work. Despite his insistence that breakfast wasn't necessary, Hannah found herself preparing a plate anyway, just simple eggs and bacon, kept warm on the back of the stove. When Westfield came in mid-morning for something from the tool shed attached to the house, she silently set the plate on the table. He looked at it, then at her. "Told you not to bother," he said, but he sat down anyway. "It's no bother. A man works better with food in his stomach." He ate quickly, efficiently, eyes occasionally darting to where Hannah was dusting the bookshelves. When he finished, he stood abruptly. "Thank you," he said, the words sounding rusty with disuse. "You're welcome, Mr. Westfield." As days passed, Hannah fell into a rhythm. Mornings spent cleaning and organizing, afternoons dedicated to laundry or mending, evenings preparing meals that gradually became more elaborate as she discovered what Westfield liked. He was a man of simple tastes, but appreciative of quality. His eyes would close briefly when he tasted something particularly good, the closest he came to expressing pleasure. A week into her employment, Hannah was airing out the study while Westfield was in town for supplies. The room was masculine and austere like its owner, but as she dusted the desk, she noticed a small photograph in a simple frame. A young woman with dark hair and a serious expression stared back at her. Hannah was still holding it when Westfield's voice came from the doorway. "My wife," he said, causing Hannah to nearly drop the frame. "Elizabeth." "I'm sorry, I was just dusting," Hannah hurried to explain, carefully replacing the photograph. "It's all right." Westfield stepped into the room, his eyes fixed on the image. "She died 4 years ago. Fever took her." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. "I'm very sorry," Hannah said softly. Westfield nodded once, then turned away. "Got supplies that need unloading." That evening, dinner was quieter than usual. Hannah had prepared roast chicken, but Westfield merely picked at his food, his mind clearly elsewhere. As she cleared the plates, she found herself wanting to bridge the silence. "My husband died too," she said abruptly, "in a mining accident back in Pennsylvania 2 years ago." Westfield looked up, surprise evident in his eyes. "I didn't know you were married." "Widowed," Hannah corrected. "Like you." Something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of shared experience. Westfield nodded slowly. "What brought you all the way out here from Pennsylvania?" "A fresh start," Hannah said simply. "Too many memories there." "And not enough money," Westfield added perceptively. Hannah stiffened slightly. "The mining company wasn't generous with compensation, but I manage. No offense meant, Miss Foster. We all have our reasons for ending up where we do." Their conversations grew more frequent after that night. Never lengthy, never deeply personal, but Hannah began to piece together Thomas Westfield's story. He'd fought for the Union, returned home to Illinois to find his parents dead from influenza, married his childhood sweetheart, and moved west to start fresh. After Elizabeth died, he'd retreated further into himself and his work. Why Fort Worth? Hannah asked one evening as they sat on the porch, watching a spectacular sunset paint the Texas sky crimson and gold. "Needed somewhere new," Westfield replied. "Somewhere without memories," he glanced at her. "Same reason you came, I expect." Hannah nodded, appreciating that he understood without requiring more explanation. In the weeks she'd been at the ranch, she'd found Thomas Westfield to be a fair employer, exacting but not demanding, private but not rude. He seemed to appreciate her work, though he rarely commented on it directly. As autumn deepened, the house gradually transformed under Hannah's care. Curtains appeared at windows, a tablecloth brightened the kitchen table, and small touches of comfort, a cushion here, a vase of late wildflowers there, softened the stark rooms. Westfield noticed but said nothing, though Hannah sometimes caught him running his fingers over a new addition, as if puzzled by its presence. One chilly October morning, Hannah was preparing to tackle the root cellar when Westfield appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Got to ride out to check the north pasture fence," he said. "Won't be back till late." Hannah nodded, continuing to gather her cleaning supplies. "I'll keep supper warm for you." Westfield lingered, uncharacteristically hesitant. "The cellar steps are rotting. Best leave that for another day." Hannah looked up, surprised by his concern. "I'll be careful, Mr. Westfield." "Thomas," he said abruptly. "Call me Thomas." Before she could respond, he'd turned and left, the back door closing firmly behind him. Hannah stood still for a moment, a curious warmth spreading through her chest. In the 6 weeks she'd been at the ranch, he'd never invited such familiarity. Perhaps he was finally beginning to see her as more than just a housekeeper. The thought was both pleasing and unsettling. The root cellar was indeed in poor condition. Hannah managed to clean and organize it, but noted that several of the steps would need replacing before winter made the cellar a daily necessity. As she worked, she thought about Thomas Westfield and the gradual change in his demeanor. He'd been so closed off when she arrived, speaking only when necessary, maintaining a careful distance. Now, he occasionally shared stories from his ranching day over dinner or asked about her life before Fort Worth. She found herself looking forward to their brief conversations, to the rare moments when something she said brought a fleeting smile to his serious face. "Getting foolish in your old age, Hannah Foster," she muttered to herself as she hauled the last of the cleaning supplies up from the cellar. She was here to work, to save enough money to perhaps open a small shop someday. Developing any sort of attachment to her employer was impractical and inappropriate. Thomas returned after dark, as promised. Hannah had kept a plate warm for him and was mending one of his shirts by lamplight when he entered the kitchen. His face was drawn with fatigue, a smudge of dirt across one cheek. "Found 3 breaks in the fence," he said by way of greeting, "and signs of rustlers." Hannah set aside her mending. "Rustlers, is that common around here?" "Common enough." Thomas sat heavily at the table. "Been reports from other ranches, nothing taken yet, but they're scouting." He noticed the plate Hannah set before him and nodded his thanks. "This looks good. You look exhausted," Hannah observed. "I can make up a hot compress for that shoulder if it's bothering you again." Thomas looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "How did you know about my shoulder?" Hannah busied herself with pouring him fresh coffee. "You favor it when the weather changes. And you mentioned once that you took a bullet there during the war." "Observant," Thomas murmured, a hint of approval in his tone. "A good housekeeper notices things," Hannah replied with a small smile. "It helps me do my job better." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "You do your job very well, Miss Foster. This place hasn't felt like a home," since he stopped, looking away, "in a long time." Hannah felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Thank you. I enjoy making things pleasant." After Thomas finished his meal, Hannah prepared a hot compress as promised. He accepted it with a nod of thanks, their fingers brushing briefly during the exchange. A small contact, but it sent an unexpected jolt through Hannah's body. "Good night, Hannah," he said quietly, using her given name for the first time. "Good night." "Thomas," she replied, testing the sound of his name on her lips. As autumn gave way to winter, the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Early darkness meant longer evenings indoors, and gradually, those evenings began to include shared activities. Hannah would sew or knit while Thomas read from one of his books, occasionally reading passages aloud when he found something interesting. Sometimes they played checkers, Thomas's serious face betraying satisfaction when he won and grudging admiration when Hannah outmaneuvered him. The first real cold snap came in early December, bringing a biting north wind that found every crack and crevice in the old house. Hannah awakened in the night, shivering despite the extra blanket she'd put on her bed. Wrapping her shawl around her nightdress, she crept downstairs to stoke the main fireplace. To her surprise, Thomas was already there, adding logs to the flames. "Cold woke you too?" he asked, glancing up. Hannah nodded, pulling her shawl tighter. "I think winter has decided to arrive all at once." "Been meaning to better seal these windows," Thomas said, gesturing to where the curtains moved slightly from the draft. "Never seemed to get to it." "I could help," Hannah offered. "My father taught me a few things about home repairs." Thomas looked at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Your father taught his daughter carpentry. He had no sons," Hannah explained, "and he believed a woman should know how to take care of herself." She moved closer to the fire, extending her hands toward the warmth. "He would have liked you, I think." "Would he?" Thomas sounded genuinely curious. "Yes, he respected men who worked hard and spoke honestly." Hannah smiled at a memory. "He had no patience for pretense." "Neither do I," Thomas agreed. He stood, suddenly seeming to realize they were both in their night clothes. You should try to get some sleep. I'll build up the fire in the kitchen stove. Might help warm the whole house. Thank you, Hannah said. Good night, Thomas. The next day, they worked together to seal the drafty windows, a project that required more teamwork than they'd previously shared. Hannah found herself enjoying the proximity, the way Thomas listened when she suggested a better method for cutting the ceiling strips, the quiet efficiency with which they worked side by side. As winter deepened, so did their companionship. Christmas approached, bringing with it memories that Hannah had tried to push aside. The holidays had always been special with her husband, James, a time for small gifts and big dreams, for planning the future they would never have. One afternoon, as snow fell gently outside, Hannah found herself humming a Christmas carol while preparing dinner. She didn't realize Thomas had come in until he spoke from the doorway. "You have a nice voice," he said quietly, Hannah startled, nearly dropping the potato she was peeling. "Oh. I didn't hear you come in. Didn't mean to frighten you." Thomas stamped the snow from his boots. "That song my mother used to sing it." "Silent Night," Hannah said. "It's always been a favorite of mine." Thomas nodded, hanging his coat on the peg by the door. "Haven't much celebrated Christmas these past years." Hannah glanced at him. "Would you like to? Nothing elaborate, just perhaps a special dinner, maybe a small tree." Thomas was silent for so long that Hannah thought he might refuse. Finally, he said, "I'd like that. If it wouldn't be too much trouble." "No trouble at all," Hannah assured him, smiling. 2 days before Christmas, they rode into Fort Worth together to purchase supplies and a few small gifts. Hannah had carefully saved from her wages to buy Thomas a new leather-bound journal, having noticed that his old one was nearly full. Thomas was secretive about his own purchases, hiding them in his saddlebag before they rode home. The town was decorated for the holiday, with evergreen boughs and red ribbons adorning the Main Street shops. A group of carolers sang outside the church, their voices lifting in the cold air. Hannah felt a happiness she hadn't expected, a sense of anticipation that had been missing from her life for too long. "You're smiling," Thomas observed as they rode home, the setting sun painting the snowy landscape in shades of pink and gold. "It's Christmas," Hannah replied simply. "Hard not to smile." Thomas studied her, his expression softening. "You've brought life back to my home, Hannah. I don't think I've properly thanked you for that." Hannah felt a warmth that had nothing to do with her heavy winter coat. "You don't need to thank me. I'm just doing my job." "No," Thomas said firmly. "It's more than that. We both know it." Before Hannah could respond, Thomas urged his horse ahead, leaving her to ponder his words as they rode the remaining distance to the ranch in comfortable silence. Christmas Eve brought a clear, cold night with stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Hannah had prepared a special dinner roast goose with all the trimmings, followed by a mince pie that had filled the house with spicy sweetness as it baked. They'd set up a small pine tree in the front room, decorated with paper stars Hannah had cut, and a few glass ornaments Thomas had unexpectedly produced from a trunk in the attic. They were Elizabeth's, he'd explained quietly. She would have wanted them used. Now, as they sat before the fire after dinner, Thomas surprised Hannah by handing her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with red string. "Merry Christmas," he said, uncharacteristic uncertainty in his voice. Hannah carefully untied the string and folded back the paper to reveal a small wooden box with delicate carvings along the edges. When she opened it, a soft melody began to play. "A music box," she breathed. "Thomas, it's beautiful. Made the box myself," he said, watching her reaction closely. The mechanism came from the jeweler in town. Hannah ran her fingers over the intricate carvings, wildflowers and vines winding around the edges. "You made this. When did you have time?" "Evenings in the barn," Thomas admitted. "Been working on it since November." Touched beyond words, Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "I've never received such a thoughtful gift. Thank you." She reached beneath the tree for her own gift to him, suddenly feeling it was inadequate compared to what he'd given her. "It's not as special as what you've made me, but—" Thomas unwrapped the journal carefully, running his hand over the smooth leather cover. "It's perfect," he said softly. Thank you, Hannah. Their eyes met across the small space between them, and Hannah felt something shift, like the last piece of a puzzle falling into place. Thomas reached out slowly, his rough hand covering hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. I never expected to feel this way again, he said, his voice low and uncertain. After Elizabeth died, I thought that part of me was gone forever. Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. What way? Like maybe there's something worth looking forward to again, something beyond just surviving each day. His fingers tightened slightly around hers. You've brought that back, Hannah. You've made me remember what it's like to want to live, not just exist. Hannah turned her hand beneath his, their palms meeting. I understand, she whispered. After James died, I thought I'd never feel anything but grief again, but being here with you, I've started to hope again. Thomas stood, drawing her up with him. For a long moment, they stood close enough that Hannah could feel the warmth of him, could see the flickering firelight reflected in his eyes. I don't have much to offer, he said quietly. Just this ranch, my work. It's a hard life out here. I don't need much, Hannah replied. Just honesty, respect, someone to share the days with. Thomas lifted his hand, his fingers hovering near her cheek as if asking permission. When Hannah nodded slightly, he touched her face with a gentleness that belied his strength. May I kiss you, Hannah Foster? Yes, she whispered, her eyes closing as Thomas leaned down to brush his lips against hers. A kiss as soft and promising as a spring breeze. When they parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. Merry Christmas, Hannah. Merry Christmas, Thomas. The days following Christmas brought changes to their relationship, small but significant shifts that transformed their shared life. Meals became opportunities for longer conversations, for learning the details of each other's past lives. Hannah told Thomas about her childhood in a small Pennsylvania town, about meeting James at a church social, about their 3 happy years together before the mining accident. Thomas shared stories of his own youth in Illinois, his time in the Army, the dreams he and Elizabeth had shared of building a life in Texas. Do you ever regret coming here? Hannah asked one evening as they sat side by side on the porch swing, despite the winter chill. She'd been mending a shirt while Thomas whittled a small figure from a piece of pine wood. Thomas considered the question. Used to, he finally said. Felt like I'd dragged Elizabeth somewhere that killed her, that maybe if we'd stayed in Illinois, she might have lived. And now? Now I understand that sickness can find you anywhere. He set aside his whittling and looked at Hannah. And that sometimes life gives you a second chance, even when you don't think you deserve one. Hannah set her mending in her lap. Do you believe in second chances, Thomas? Starting to, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Because of you? Their second kiss was different from the first, deeper, more certain. Thomas's arms encircled her, drawing her close against his solid warmth. Hannah felt something tight within her chest finally release, like a knot untying after years of constriction. As January brought even colder weather, Thomas began working on plans to expand the ranch. With Hannah by his side in the evenings, he sketched out ideas for additional pastureland, for breeding better stock, for perhaps adding orchards to the eastern slope beyond the house. You're making plans for the future, Hannah observed one night as they reviewed his drawings. Real, long-term plans. Thomas looked up, his eyes meeting hers. Got something to plan for now, he said simply. February brought Valentine's Day, a holiday Hannah hadn't expected Thomas to acknowledge. But she woke that morning to find a single wild rose somehow procured despite the winter weather laid across her pillow, along with a note in Thomas's strong handwriting. For the woman who brought spring back to my life. That evening, Thomas asked Hannah to walk with him to the ridge overlooking the ranch. Despite the cold, the sky was clear, stars beginning to appear in the deepening twilight. This is where I first stood when I bought this land, Thomas said, his breath making clouds in the frosty air. Elizabeth and I stood right here and imagined what we would build together. He turned to Hannah. I never thought I'd stand here with anyone else, never thought I'd want to. Hannah slipped her hand into his. Life takes unexpected turns. Yes, it does. Thomas took both her hands in his. Hannah Foster, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards. but I feel like I've known you all my life in the ways that matter. You came to clean my house, but what you really did was clean my soul, swept away all the dust and cobwebs of grief until I could see clearly again." Hannah felt tears freezing on her cheeks. "Thomas, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not a man who speaks easily about feelings, but I need you to know that I love you. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you hum when you think no one is listening. I love how you've made my house into a home again." He dropped to one knee on the frozen ground. "Would you consider making it your home permanently, as my wife?" Hannah's heart soared. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." Thomas stood and pulled her into an embrace, his kiss warming her despite the winter chill. They were married in April, when the wildflowers began to carpet the Texas hillsides. The ceremony was small, held in the Fort Worth church with only a few neighbors and townspeople in attendance. Hannah wore a simple cream-colored dress that she'd sewn herself, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Thomas, unaccustomed to formal clothes, looked both handsome and uncomfortable in his new suit. "You look beautiful," he whispered as they stood before the preacher. "So do you," Hannah whispered back, enjoying the way his ears reddened at the compliment. Their vows were straightforward and heartfelt promises to honor and cherish, to stand together through good times and bad, to build a life founded on respect and love. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Hannah with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The small reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard beneath the big oak tree. Lanterns hung from the branches, and Hannah's newly planted flower garden provided color and fragrance. As evening approached, Thomas led his bride in a dance while neighbors clapped in time to music provided by a fiddler from town. "Happy, Mrs. Westfield?" Thomas asked as they moved slowly across the makeshift dance floor. "Very happy, Mr. Westfield," Hannah replied, smiling up at him. "Though I do wonder if you'll still want me to clean your house now that I'm your wife." Thomas laughed, the sound still rare enough to draw glances from their guests. "I didn't marry you for your housekeeping skills, though they are considerable." "No," Hannah teased. "Why did you marry me then?" Thomas pulled her closer. "Because you reminded me that life is for living, not just surviving, because you see the good in me, even when I can't see it myself." His voice dropped lower, meant only for her. "And because I fall in love with you a little more each day." Summer brought long days of hard work and warm nights filled with shared dreams. Thomas and Hannah settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. They worked side by side during the day, Hannah maintaining the house and garden while helping with ranch chores when needed, Thomas tending to the cattle and the land, gradually expanding their operations. At night, they shared the intimacy of marriage, discovering each other's bodies with the same care they took in learning each other's hearts. By autumn, Hannah had news to share. She waited until they'd finished supper one evening, the harvest moon rising full and golden beyond the kitchen window. "Thomas," she said, reaching for his hand across the table, "I have something to tell you." He looked up from the accounts he'd been reviewing. "What is it?" "We're going to have a baby," Hannah said, watching his face carefully. "Next spring." Thomas went very still, his eyes widening. For a moment, Hannah feared she'd misjudged. Perhaps he didn't want children. Perhaps the memory of losing Elizabeth made the prospect too frightening. Then he was out of his chair, kneeling beside her, his hands trembling as they covered hers. "A baby." He whispered, as if saying it too loudly might make it untrue. Hannah nodded. "Dr. Simmons confirmed it yesterday when I was in town." Thomas placed a gentle hand on her still flat abdomen, awe evident in his expression. "A baby," he repeated. "Our baby. Are you happy?" Hannah asked, though his face had already given her the answer. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. He leaned forward to kiss her, his lips conveying what words could not. The pregnancy progressed without complications. Thomas became protective, insisting that Hannah rest more and taking on some of her usual tasks. Hannah found his concern touching, if occasionally stifling. "I'm not made of glass, Thomas," she reminded him one December day when he tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I know that," he said, taking the basket anyway, But you're carrying something precious, more precious than anything on this ranch. Hannah softened, reaching up to touch his face. We're both fine, the baby and me, but I appreciate your concern. As winter settled over the ranch once more, Thomas began working on a cradle in the evenings, a beautiful piece crafted from cherry wood with the same intricate carvings he'd put on Hannah's music box. Hannah sewed tiny garments and quilted a blanket, sometimes pausing to rest her hand on her growing belly, marveling at the life within. Christmas came again, marking a year since their relationship had truly begun. They celebrated quietly, exchanging simple gifts and reminiscing about how much had changed in 12 months. Last Christmas, I was still just your housekeeper, Hannah said as they sat before the fire, her head resting against Thomas's shoulder. You were never just anything to me, Thomas replied, his hand gently caressing her rounded stomach. Even then, you were already becoming everything. The new year brought increasingly cold weather and the final preparations for the baby's arrival. Thomas finished the cradle and built a rocking chair for the nursery, the small room adjacent to their bedroom that Hannah had painted a soft yellow. Hannah completed the last of the baby clothes and arranged them carefully in the chest of drawers Thomas had refinished. In late March, as the first bluebonnets began to appear on the hillsides, Hannah went into labor. Thomas rode for the doctor and the midwife, his face pale with worry. Everything will be fine, Hannah assured him before he left, though her own heart fluttered with anxiety. We'll both be here when you get back. The labor was long but uncomplicated. With the midwife's calm guidance and the doctor's occasional checks, Hannah brought their daughter into the world just as dawn was breaking on the first day of April. Thomas, who had paced outside the bedroom door all night, was finally allowed in to see his wife and child. He entered the room hesitantly, his eyes immediately finding Hannah in the bed, their tiny daughter cradled in her arms. Thomas, Hannah said softly, come meet your daughter. He approached slowly, almost reverently. When he reached the bedside, he sank to his knees, overcome with emotion. She's perfect, he whispered, carefully touching the infant's tiny hand. Just like her mother, Hannah smiled tiredly. I thought we might name her Elizabeth Rose. After your first wife and my mother. Thomas looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Are you sure? Very sure, Hannah said. Elizabeth was an important part of your life. She should be honored. Thomas leaned forward to kiss his wife, then gently pressed his lips to his daughter's forehead. Elizabeth Rose Westfield, he said, testing the name. It's beautiful. Spring bloomed fully around the ranch as the new parents adjusted to life with an infant. Elizabeth, already called Ellie by her adoring father, thrived under their care. Hannah recovered quickly from the birth, soon resuming her normal activities with Ellie either in her arms or nearby in a basket. One afternoon in May, as Hannah hung laundry on the line with Ellie sleeping in her basket in the shade, Thomas returned early from checking fences. He dismounted and approached his wife, watching as she stretched to pin a sheet to the line. Need some help? He offered, reaching to hold up the trailing edge of the sheet. Thank you, Hannah said, smiling at him. You're home early, finished quicker than I expected. Thomas helped her with the rest of the laundry, then nodded toward the house. Got something to show you inside. Curious, Hannah picked up Ellie's basket and followed her husband into the house. He led her to his study, where a new piece of furniture stood in the corner, a beautiful writing desk with a matching chair. Thomas, it's lovely, Hannah said, running her hand along the polished surface. It's for you, Thomas explained. I know you've been keeping a journal of Ellie's first days, thought you might like a proper place to write. Hannah set Ellie's basket down carefully and turned to embrace her husband. It's perfect, thank you. Thomas held her close, his chin resting atop her head. Been thinking lately about how much has changed since you first came here. This place was just a house then, now it's a home. Hannah leaned back to look up at him. And you, how have you changed? Thomas considered the question. When you first arrived, I was just existing, going through the motions of living without really being alive. He touched her face gently. You changed that. You and now, Ellie, you've given me reasons to truly live again. Hannah smiled, tears gathering in her eyes. You've done the same for me. After James died, I thought my chance at happiness was over. I came here looking for work, not love. Found both, Thomas said with a small smile. Yes, I did. Hannah stood on tiptoe to kiss him, a kiss full of promise and certainty. As summer approached, bringing its intense Texas heat, the Westfield family settled into a rhythm that suited them all. Thomas continued to expand and improve the ranch, his newfound happiness giving him energy and purpose. Hannah cared for Ellie and the household, occasionally riding with Thomas to check the property, the baby securely nestled in a special carrier Thomas had designed. 10 years later, the Westfield ranch had tripled in size. 3 children now filled the expanded house with laughter and energy. Elizabeth Rose, now a thoughtful 10-year-old with her father's serious eyes. James Thomas, an active 7-year-old with his mother's gentle heart. And Sarah Grace, a precocious 4-year-old who combined the best qualities of both parents. On their 10th anniversary, Thomas surprised Hannah with a trip to the ridge where he had proposed. The children were staying with neighbors for the night, giving the couple a rare evening alone. "Remember the first time I brought you up here?" Thomas asked as they spread a blanket on the ground, the setting sun painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. "Of course," Hannah replied, accepting the glass of wine he offered. "You proposed right here. I was so cold I could barely feel my toes, but so happy I didn't care." Thomas laughed, the sound coming easily now after years of happiness. "I was terrified you'd say no." "As if I could have," Hannah said, leaning against him. "I'd already fallen completely in love with you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "Any regrets?" Thomas asked eventually. "About marrying a difficult rancher and moving to the middle of nowhere," Hannah turned to him, taking his face in her hands. Despite the gray now threading through his hair and the additional lines around his eyes, he was still the most handsome man she'd ever known. "Not a single one," she said firmly. "Every day with you has been a gift, Thomas, even the hard ones." Thomas covered her hands with his own. "When you first came to clean my house, I had no idea you'd end up cleaning my soul as well. You swept away all the darkness, Hannah, and filled every corner with light." "We did that together," Hannah corrected gently. "Healed each other." As the full moon rose over the Texas landscape, Thomas and Hannah Westfield sealed their decade of love with a kiss that held all the passion of their first years together, deepened by the shared experiences, challenges, and joys that had forged their unbreakable bond. From housekeeper to wife, from employer to husband, from 2 broken souls to 1 complete family, their journey had been unexpected but perfect in its own way. The life they'd built together on the Texas ranch was everything neither had dared to hope for after their individual losses. A second chance at love, a family to cherish, and the certainty that whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together, their love only growing stronger with each passing year.